Okay, thank you very much. A good roundup of a range of considerations that you make in judging your long-term plans. If we could also talk a little bit about the long-term with you, David. The sort of projects you've been looking at, again, are on infrastructure, looking at how the roads and the rail and rest can be developed, if that's going to be possible, if the political situation is right. So would you like to talk for a few minutes about the sort of thing you've been working on, and then we can open up for a broader discussion?
Thank you. As you're aware, the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the major project in terms of operation, 70% of our operation is in South Africa, and 30% is external. And Zimbabwe has always been a key area. And since the signing of the GPA, we have been involved in small ways with our partners in Zimbabwe and taking cue from the GPA and the views that are coming from the AU as well as SADC itself in terms of the situation in Zimbabwe. As a development finance institution, I think we're quite aware that for us, as eloquently put by the Prime Minister this morning, when he referred to elections, that there is no better time for elections. I think from an infrastructure position, for us, there is also no better time. This is the right time to ensure that Zimbabwe's infrastructure is rehabilitated. And we don't look at Zimbabwe just as a country. I think we look at Zimbabwe broadly from SADC as well as the continent. You cannot develop the continent without Zimbabwe. I think for DBSA it is quite critical that Zimbabwe's infrastructure is rehabilitated, is strengthened to ensure that the entire region operates at its maximum. And therefore, I think we are working on a number of projects, as I've mentioned, and some of them have been mentioned by the Prime Minister. The Bait Bridge, Chirundi, Harare, Mutare. And those projects are at a very early stage, and quite a number of issues that has to be ironed out in negotiation. But we are in a number of other areas, such as energy, ICT, and ensure that these critical areas of development for Zimbabwe as well as SADC is realized and is realized now. And therefore, as an African development finance, it is important that the situation in Zimbabwe stabilize. And we are really impressed with what the Prime Minister has said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to follow up on what both of you have said about how you've responded to the political change. You responded to the global political agreement, the power-sharing government, and then either changed your approach to Zimbabwe or not changed your approach. And I'm intrigued to know how this is an indicator of how much confidence you have in what will happen next in Zimbabwe. So if we stick with you, David, you talk about some of these projects being at an early stage of development, and you talked about roads and energy and other aspects of it. Are you still holding back? Are you still waiting to see more political process? Are you waiting for the next election? Why haven't we moved to another stage yet? What is it you're waiting to see happen before these projects get further?
As I said, we are an African institution, development finance, and therefore we have no choice. Zimbabwe is part of the neighborhood, and therefore development of the region really depends on changes in Zimbabwe, and therefore infrastructure is critical. It's the backbone of the economy of Zimbabwe. And I'm afraid to say we are moving, and we are cautiously and ensure that we help people of Zimbabwe, ourselves, as we move and wait for others to come in. And we are not alone. There are quite a number of other DFIs and people who are already in Zimbabwe. And therefore, that's why I said we have we're not holding back. We are in. And when I say we are negotiating, it's just the due process. And as you're aware in business, the law of Zimbabwe has to be followed to the latter. And therefore, those are kind of issues that we are waiting for approval and the like. It's not a question of waiting for for any other situation, for political or any other reason.
Okay. Could I turn to you now with mining? I mean, you talked about having very long-term, I know in mining it's often 20 years or more, your long-term planning periods from when you decide to kick off a project to when you start getting some returns on it. Do you feel that in the past 18 months, 20 months, there's been a significant, reliable change that will allow you to make those long-term decisions, or do you still feel it's necessary as an investor to hold back and wait for more certainty in Zimbabwe?
Firstly, for us specifically as an investor, we haven't held back. We have been developing our project. We'll be commissioning the mine end of this year, so we actually haven't held back. The Prime Minister spoke about, if you may just allow me to digress a little bit, about the dichotomy with the President. And quite often, I've been asked this question a few times. Aren't you concerned with indigenization? And bear in mind what the Prime Minister said, the Act was actually promulgated in 2004. We got issued with our special mining list this year. I think what is quite important is that, and that's the message I give a lot of people, and that's the message I might as well just give the other investors, is that actually if the President so wished not to issue it, he could have decided not to. It was down to him to issue the special mining list to us with the conditions that were in it, bearing in mind that actually indigenization was part of that. And in our negotiations with the government of Zimbabwe in the last 18 months, we do understand the principles and the intent of what they're trying to do. And we are committed to work together with them as Anglo to ensure that the principles of empowerment, broad-based empowerment, are actually fulfilled from that point of view. And those are the kind of things that we do. Some of the changes they've made from a long-term mining investment point of view are arguably the most attractive changes you would see from a mining investment point of view. There isn't many countries with the same forex regime as you find in Zimbabwe today that we operate in as a company. And that's a huge attraction from a mining investment point of view. The only key thing that I was asking is, how consistent is that? Is this something that will last just the next 2 years and we have another policy coming into place? And thus far, the discussions we've had in our engagement with the government is that there is commitment to provide us with that consistency going forward.
So you've seen, in some areas in Forex, a remarkable improvement in your operating conditions. One imagines, too, that your experience in South Africa of dealing with broad-based black economic empowerment is relevant to the sort of description that the Prime Minister gave us earlier of what it could look like in Zimbabwe. But it sounds to me like you're not entirely convinced that's what it will look like. It might be a rather more insistent or aggressive form of indigenization.
One has to accept that where we are today, I think he did mention the fact that the sectoral boards have just been put in place. And that's the mechanism for us to actually say, how is this thing going to look like? And one of the things that we're talking through with the government and the sectoral boards is the minimum threshold. And how do we actually then meet the 51% between the minimum threshold of equity and that 51% as required? What is important to us as an investor, however, is the fact that the government, throughout that process, despite all the disagreements in the political divide that we know does exist in the country, has continued to engage with us as investors. Do we always get the answers we want? We don't. But as long as we can engage and we can make our point of view heard, and being a global organization which brings in experience not just from South Africa but from elsewhere, from an empowerment point of view, we have found that by and large the government is willing to listen. But we have to see how these regulations will pan out when they are in their final form, and that's a process we work through with the Chamber of Mines.